The gym had become my quiet refuge, the one place where the noise of my life softened into something manageable. Every morning before work, I walked through its glass doors with a practiced calm, earbuds in, shoulders set, pretending that routine was the same thing as balance. I told myself I came for discipline, for health, for the steady rhythm of lifting and releasing. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I came because it was easier to focus on my body than on the gaps forming elsewhere. Mark and I had been together long enough to stop counting the months. We shared an apartment, a schedule, and a language of half-finished sentences. On the surface, nothing was wrong. We cooked dinner most nights, argued gently about trivial things, and fell asleep to the same shows we had watched for years. But something essential had thinned between us. Our conversations skimmed the surface of days without diving into how either of us felt. When I tried to name the distance, it slipped away, leaving me with a vague guilt for wanting more than what I already had. At the gym, no one asked me how I was doing beyond the basics. No one expected emotional honesty. The mirrors reflected effort, not confusion. I could measure progress in repetitions and sweat, in numbers that made sense. That morning was no different, or so I thought, until Ryan stepped into my line of sight. He was one of the trainers, new enough that I hadn't learned the habit of ignoring him. Ryan moved with an easy confidence that didn't demand attention but gathered it anyway. He corrected a client's posture with patience, his voice steady and calm, and I noticed how naturally people listened to him. When our eyes met briefly, he offered a nod that felt less like customer service and more like recognition. I returned to my workout, annoyed with myself for noticing. Attraction was not the problem, it happened everywhere, all the time. What unsettled me was the way that single look lingered, like a question I hadn't meant to ask. I focused on my breathing, on the controlled burn in my muscles, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the ease in Ryan's posture, the attentiveness in his expression. Later, as I struggled with a weight I should have handled easily, Ryan approached. He asked my name first, which caught me off guard. When I told him, he repeated it once, as if committing it to memory. His advice was practical and brief, his tone professional, but there was an attentiveness that felt personal. He watched not just my form, but my reaction, adjusting his guidance when he saw the tension in my shoulders. "Don't force it," Ryan said. "Let it come naturally." The words were meant for the exercise, yet they landed somewhere deeper. I thanked him and finished my set, aware of Mark in the back of my mind, of the life waiting outside the gym. Ryan didn't linger. He returned to his work, leaving behind a strange mix of relief and disappointment. On my way out, I checked my phone and saw a message from Mark asking what I wanted for dinner. The familiarity of the question should have comforted me. Instead, it highlighted how predictable everything had become. I typed a neutral reply and slipped the phone back into my pocket. As I stepped into the morning air, I told myself that nothing had happened. A trainer had done his job. I had read too much into a fleeting interaction. Still, the sense of being noticed stayed with me, quiet but persistent. It followed me through the day, a reminder that even the most stable routines can hide unanswered longings. I didn't know it yet, but that brief moment at the gym had already shifted something inside me. And once a shift begins, no amount of routine can put everything back exactly where it was. I told myself that returning to the gym the next morning meant nothing. Routine, after all, was my excuse for everything. Still, I arrived earlier than usual, unsettled by the awareness that part of me was scanning the room. When I spotted Ryan near the free weights, a familiar tension settled into my chest, equal parts curiosity and restraint. Our interactions grew naturally, almost innocently. Ryan greeted me by name, asked how my body felt after the last session, and offered small adjustments that made a noticeable difference. Each exchange was professional on the surface, yet threaded with an ease I hadn't expected. He remembered details, my work hours, the exercises I avoided, the fact that mornings suited me better than evenings. Being remembered felt warmer than it should have. Between sets, conversation filled the spaces where breathlessness eased. Ryan talked about training philosophies, about helping people reconnect with their bodies rather than punish them. I found myself listening more closely than necessary, drawn to the calm certainty in his voice. When he asked about my life outside the gym, I hesitated before answering. I mentioned Mark, framing our relationship in careful, respectful terms. Ryan didn't react with surprise or discomfort. He simply nodded, acknowledging the information without judgment. That reaction mattered more than I wanted to admit. Mark knew everything about me, yet lately our conversations felt rehearsed, as if we were both protecting something fragile by refusing to touch it. With Ryan, I spoke freely about smaller truths: stress at work, trouble sleeping, the way motivation sometimes vanished without warning. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. At home, Mark noticed my distraction. He asked if I was tired, if work had been overwhelming. I answered honestly enough to avoid suspicion but not enough to reveal the rest. Guilt followed me through the apartment, trailing behind mundane gestures like setting the table or rinsing dishes. I wondered when honesty had started to feel like a risk. Days turned into weeks, and the gym became more than an escape. It was a place where I felt present, where effort produced immediate results. Ryan's presence sharpened that feeling. Our conversations deepened cautiously, circling around topics that edged closer to vulnerability. He spoke about his career with quiet pride, about the discipline it took to build trust with strangers. He avoided talking about his personal life, which somehow made me more aware of my own. One morning, after a particularly focused session, Ryan asked if everything was okay. The question was gentle, unassuming, but it landed with unexpected weight. I considered giving the usual answer, the safe one, yet something in his expression made evasion feel dishonest. I admitted that I felt stuck, unsure of what I wanted beyond the structure I had built. Ryan didn't offer advice. He said that feeling uncertain didn't mean something was broken, only that it wanted attention. The simplicity of his words unsettled me. I left the gym that day with my thoughts louder than my music, replaying the conversation until it blurred into feeling. That night, Mark and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, sharing space without sharing ourselves. I studied his familiar features and wondered how distance could exist even when nothing obvious was wrong. The realization that I hadn't spoken to him with the same openness I gave Ryan filled me with quiet shame. The next time I saw Ryan, our exchange felt different. Not more intimate, but more charged, as if both of us sensed a line drawing itself between what was said and what remained unspoken. When our conversation ended, neither of us moved away immediately. The pause was brief, almost imperceptible, yet it lingered long after I walked out. I told myself again that nothing had crossed a boundary. No promises had been made, no rules broken. Still, as I stepped into the familiar rhythm of my life, I couldn't ignore the truth forming beneath my justifications. Something had shifted. I had allowed someone else to see me in ways I had stopped offering at home. And once that door opens, it rarely closes without consequence. The gym was quieter than usual that evening, the air heavy with the echo of weights being racked and the low hum of machines powering down. I had stayed later than I planned, stretching time the way I had been stretching truth. When I finished my last set, Ryan was the only trainer still on the floor, wiping down equipment with unhurried focus. He noticed me hesitating near the lockers and asked if I needed help with anything. The question was simple, but it loosened something in my chest. I told him I was done for the day, that I just needed a moment. He nodded, as if he understood without explanation, and waited. We talked near the edge of the training area, far enough from the mirrors to feel less exposed. The conversation drifted easily, touching on mundane things at first. Ryan mentioned how the gym felt different after hours, stripped of performance and noise. I agreed, surprised by how accurately he described the calm I felt there. It was the kind of quiet that invites honesty. Eventually, the topic circled back to me. Ryan asked how things were at home, his voice careful, respectful of the answer he might receive. I hesitated, then chose a truth that had been pressing against my ribs for weeks. I said that Mark and I were fine, but not close. That fine had become a word I used to avoid saying lonely. Ryan listened without interrupting, his attention steady. When I finished, the silence stretched, not awkward but weighted. He admitted that he recognized the feeling, that sometimes connection fades not because of conflict, but because of neglect. His words didn't excuse my restlessness, but they named it, and that alone felt dangerous. I became acutely aware of how close we stood, of the way the space between us seemed smaller than before. Nothing about the moment was hurried. If anything, it was restrained, as though both of us were measuring the cost of what we were allowing to happen. I thought of Mark, of our shared mornings and quiet nights, and felt the familiar pull of obligation tighten around my chest. Ryan broke the silence by saying my name, softly, without expectation. He said that whatever I was feeling deserved honesty, even if honesty led somewhere uncomfortable. The simplicity of the statement made it harder to dismiss. I realized then that what unsettled me wasn't attraction alone, but the clarity he offered when my own life felt blurred. I confessed that I hadn't felt seen in a long time. The admission surprised me as it left my mouth, raw and unfiltered. Ryan didn't step closer, didn't reach for me. He only held my gaze, his expression open, as if granting me permission to exist without pretense. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like to lean into that understanding, to choose the immediacy of this connection over the slow work waiting at home. The thought scared me enough to keep my feet planted. Yet when Ryan's hand brushed mine in a brief, instinctive gesture of reassurance, the contact sent a jolt through me that felt unmistakably intimate. We both noticed it. Ryan withdrew his hand immediately, his face shifting with awareness. He apologized, not because the touch had been wrong, but because it had been revealing. I shook my head, unable to say that it was okay without acknowledging that it wasn't. The gym lights dimmed automatically, signaling closing time. The interruption felt almost merciful. Ryan said he should lock up, and I agreed that I should go. Neither of us moved right away. The moment hung between us, fragile and unresolved, a question neither of us dared to answer aloud. As I finally turned toward the exit, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest, equal parts guilt and relief. I knew that something had changed, that even without promises or confessions, a boundary had been crossed in spirit if not in action. The walk home felt longer than usual, each step carrying the weight of what I hadn't told Mark and what I couldn't stop thinking about. That night, lying beside someone who trusted me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the evening until sleep found me. I understood then that the moment at the gym wasn't an ending or a beginning, but a turning point. Whatever came next would demand a choice, and avoiding it was no longer an option. The days that followed moved with deceptive normalcy. I went to work, answered messages, shared meals with Mark, and returned to the gym as if nothing had shifted. Yet everything felt altered, like furniture rearranged in the dark. I knew the space differently now, even when I pretended not to notice. I avoided Ryan at first, adjusting my schedule to miss him. Distance seemed like the responsible choice, a quiet way to restore order without confrontation. But avoidance carries its own weight. Each time I stepped onto the gym floor, I felt the absence as sharply as his presence had once registered. It reminded me that restraint doesn't erase desire, it only teaches it to wait. At home, Mark sensed the change. He asked gentler questions, lingered longer in doorways, searched my face for cues I struggled to give. I wanted to tell him everything, that the distance between us had become visible to someone else, that it frightened me how easily I had leaned into being understood. Instead, I offered fragments. I said I felt unsettled. I said I didn't know why. The truth hovered between us, unspoken and heavy. When I finally saw Ryan again, it was unplanned. He greeted me the same way he always had, with professionalism and restraint, but his eyes held a question he didn't voice. We spoke briefly, carefully, keeping the conversation anchored to the practical. Still, the awareness lingered, not of what had happened, but of what it had revealed. Later, as I cooled down, Ryan approached me one last time. He said he hoped I was doing okay. The concern in his voice was genuine, not inviting, and that mattered. I thanked him and told him I was figuring things out. It wasn't a promise or a confession, just the closest thing to honesty I could manage. He nodded, accepting the boundary without resentment. Walking home, I thought about how easily I had mistaken clarity for escape. Ryan hadn't offered me a new life or an easy answer. He had offered attention, presence, and a mirror. What I saw reflected there was uncomfortable but necessary. The infidelity I feared wasn't defined by touch or secrecy alone, it lived in the moments I chose silence over truth. That night, I sat with Mark at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done. I told him I felt disconnected, that I had been carrying doubts I didn't know how to name. I didn't mention Ryan, not because I wanted to hide him, but because the story wasn't about another person. It was about us, and the work we had avoided. Mark listened, his expression a mix of hurt and resolve. He said he felt the distance too, and that he had been waiting for me to speak first. The conversation didn't fix anything. It didn't need to. It shifted the weight, redistributed it between us so I no longer carried it alone. We agreed to slow down, to pay attention again, to decide, honestly, what we wanted and whether we could still offer it to each other. In the weeks that followed, The gym returned to being a place of effort and release, no longer an escape but a reflection. Ryan remained a presence at the edges of my awareness, respectful and distant, a reminder of a moment when I almost chose differently. I didn't regret meeting him. I regretted how close I had come to letting avoidance make a choice for me. I learned that desire doesn't always point toward another person. Sometimes it points back at the life you're already living, demanding that you inhabit it more fully. Whether Mark and I would find our way back to each other remained uncertain. But uncertainty, I realized, was better than drifting. That day at the gym didn't give me an ending. It gave me a reckoning. And reckoning, I had learned, is where real stories begin.